He woke up before the alarm, not because he was disciplined, but because his mind never truly slept. Even in the quietest moments, his thoughts kept racing, lining up invisible scorecards, measuring where he stood compared to everyone else. The room was small, familiar, almost comforting, yet his chest felt tight, as if the walls themselves were reminding him of everything he hadn't become yet. Before his feet touched the floor, before he stretched or took a deep breath, the comparisons had already begun. He reached for his phone out of habit, not curiosity. The screen lit up his face as he scrolled through lives that felt brighter, faster, more complete than his own. Someone had just bought a new house. Someone else had announced a promotion. Someone younger than him was suddenly an expert, a leader, a success story. He told himself he was happy for them, and in some distant way, he was. But beneath that politeness lived a quiet ache, a question that refused to go away. Why not me? There was a time when mornings felt hopeful. When waking up meant possibilities instead of pressure. He remembered those days faintly, like memories from a different lifetime. Back then, he didn't check his worth against others before breakfast. He didn't measure progress by likes, salaries, or timelines. But somewhere along the way, life stopped being something he experienced and became something he evaluated. He moved through his routine on autopilot. Shower, clothes, coffee. The mirror reflected a face that looked fine to everyone else but felt unfamiliar to him. He didn't hate what he saw, but he didn't recognize confidence there either. Just someone trying very hard to appear okay. Outside, the city was already alive. People walked with purpose, cars moved with urgency, conversations overlapped in a rhythm that made him feel both connected and invisible. Everyone seemed to be going somewhere important. Everyone except him, or so it felt. He wondered how many of them were secretly asking the same questions, hiding the same doubts behind busy schedules. At work, he did what was expected of him. Nothing more, nothing less. He wasn't failing, but he wasn't standing out either. And that middle space felt unbearable. Praise felt empty because it wasn't extraordinary. Criticism felt devastating because it confirmed his worst fears. He couldn't enjoy stability because he mistook it for stagnation. During lunch, he overheard coworkers talking about future plans. Investments. Career moves. Big dreams spoken confidently, as if the path ahead were already guaranteed. He smiled, nodded, added a comment here and there, but inside, something twisted. He had dreams too, once. Somewhere along the way, they had become comparisons instead of desires. By the time evening arrived, he was exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. It wasn't physical tiredness. It was the kind that comes from constantly trying to measure up to an invisible standard that keeps changing. The kind that drains you slowly, quietly, until you forget what rest feels like. Instead of heading straight home, he kept walking. He didn't know why. Maybe he just wanted distance from the familiar walls that echoed his thoughts back at him. His phone battery had died, or maybe he had turned it off deliberately. Either way, the silence felt strange at first, then strangely relieving. His steps slowed when he noticed the park. It wasn't impressive. No bright lights, no modern design, no crowd-chasing distraction. Just trees, old benches, and a stillness that felt almost forgotten. He hadn't been there in years, maybe decades. As a child, it had felt big and endless. Now it felt small, but safe. He sat down on a bench that creaked under his weight. For a moment, he did nothing. No scrolling. No thinking about what he should be doing. Just breathing. The air felt different there, lighter, as if the park existed outside the usual rules of urgency. An old man sat on the same bench, a little distance away. He hadn't noticed him at first. The man's presence was quiet, unassuming. He wore simple clothes, nothing that suggested success or failure, just existence. He was feeding crumbs to pigeons with slow, patient movements, as if time had agreed to move at his pace for once. They sat in silence longer than felt comfortable. Then the old man spoke. "You look like someone who's carrying a lot." The word surprised him. He almost laughed. "I guess everyone is," he replied carefully. The old man nodded. "True. But not everyone lets it show." Something about the way he said it made him feel seen in a way that felt both comforting and unsettling. He didn't respond immediately. He didn't know how. The old man continued feeding the birds. "People think exhaustion comes from doing too much," he said. "Most of the time, it comes from thinking too much." That landed closer to home than he expected. Without planning to, he spoke. About feeling behind. About watching others move forward while he stayed in place. About the pressure to prove himself, not because he wanted to, but because he felt like he had to. The words came out unevenly, some rushed, some hesitant, but once they started, they didn't stop. The old man listened without interrupting. He didn't correct him, didn't offer quick solutions. He simply listened, as if there were nowhere else he needed to be. When the young man finally fell silent, the old man spoke softly. "Comparison has a way of convincing us that we are late, even when we are exactly where we need to be." He frowned slightly. "It doesn't feel that way." "No," the old man agreed. "It never does." The pigeons fluttered away, leaving crumbs scattered on the ground. The park felt quieter somehow, like the world had leaned in to listen. "I spent years chasing other people's timelines," the old man continued. "I thought if I matched their speed, I'd feel successful. I never did." He hesitated before asking the question that had haunted him for years. "What if I really am behind?" The old man looked at him then, really looked at him. "Behind whom?" he asked gently. The question stayed with him, unanswered, heavy and light at the same time. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the need to respond immediately. He let the silence hold the question. Something inside him shifted, not enough to change everything, but enough to open a crack. And through that crack, a thought slipped in, unfamiliar but hopeful. What if his life wasn't wrong, just different? He didn't realize how long he had been sitting there until the sky began to change color. The orange fading into blue felt symbolic somehow, like an ending and a beginning sharing the same moment. The old man stood up slowly, brushing crumbs from his hands, as if he had said everything he needed to say without actually saying much at all. "You'll think about that question," the old man said calmly. "Most people do." Before he could ask another thing, the man nodded once and walked away, disappearing between the trees. No dramatic goodbye, no advice written down, just a question left behind like a seed. Behind whom? The walk home felt different. The streets were the same, the noise unchanged, but something inside him had softened. His phone was still off. He didn't rush to turn it on. For once, he wasn't curious about what he might be missing. That alone felt unfamiliar. That night, sleep came slowly but gently. His thoughts didn't vanish, but they were quieter, less demanding. When comparisons surfaced, they didn't sting as sharply. He noticed them instead of drowning in them. That small distance made a difference. The next morning, the habit returned. He reached for his phone. Notifications waited patiently, as they always did. Success announcements, achievements, perfectly framed moments. His chest tightened out of reflex. Then he paused. Behind whom? The question rose again, not accusing, just curious. He didn't have an answer, but he didn't need one yet. He set the phone down and finished getting ready without scrolling. It felt awkward, like using a muscle he hadn't exercised in years. At work, nothing had changed. Same desk, same tasks, same expectations. But his attention had. He noticed how often his mind wandered into comparison even during simple moments. Someone spoke confidently in a meeting, and his thoughts immediately measured his own voice against theirs. Someone received praise, and his mind quietly asked why he hadn't. These thoughts used to feel automatic, invisible. Now he saw them clearly. Seeing them didn't stop them immediately. But it gave him a choice. He started experimenting with that choice. When comparison arose, he didn't fight it. He simply asked what it was trying to protect him from. Fear of failure. Fear of being insignificant. Fear of being forgotten. The answers weren't comfortable, but they were honest. During lunch, instead of scrolling through other people's milestones, he stepped outside. The air felt sharp and real. He watched people walk by, each carrying a life full of invisible struggles and private victories. He realized how little he truly knew about anyone's journey, yet how confidently he had judged his own against theirs. That afternoon, he caught himself minimizing his own progress out of habit. He stopped mid-thought. He listed what he had learned recently, what he had survived, what he was quietly proud of. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't impressive by social standards. But it was real. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Days passed. Then weeks. The change wasn't obvious to anyone else, but it was undeniable to him. Comparison still visited, but it no longer stayed long. He noticed that the less time he spent consuming other people's lives, the more energy he had for his own. Creativity returned in small ways. Curiosity followed. He remembered interests he had abandoned because they didn't seem impressive enough. Writing for himself. Learning without needing to monetize it immediately. Walking without tracking steps or productivity. These things didn't earn applause, but they brought peace. One evening, he met an old friend he hadn't seen in years. They talked about life, about expectations, about how different things had turned out. The friend admitted feeling lost despite outward success. The confession surprised him, not because it was shocking, but because it confirmed something he was beginning to understand. Everyone compares. Everyone doubts. Everyone hides it differently. Walking home that night, he felt lighter. Not because he had solved everything, but because he had stopped pretending the solution was becoming someone else. He returned to the park often after that. Sometimes the bench was empty. Sometimes it wasn't. He never saw the old man again, but he didn't need to. The lesson stayed. He learned that comparison doesn't disappear when life improves. It disappears when self-acceptance grows stronger than insecurity. And self-acceptance wasn't something he achieved once. It was something he practiced daily. Some mornings were still hard. Some days, the old heaviness returned without warning. But now, he met it with patience instead of panic. He reminded himself that growth wasn't loud. Healing wasn't fast. And fulfillment didn't follow a shared schedule. He stopped asking when his life would begin and realized it already had. As time moved forward, he began to notice subtle changes not just in his thoughts but in his reactions. Situations that once triggered immediate self-doubt now paused, as if waiting for his permission before affecting him. That pause became powerful. It allowed him to respond instead of react, to choose curiosity over criticism. He realized how deeply comparison had shaped his identity. For years, he hadn't asked what he wanted. He had only asked what he was supposed to want. Goals were borrowed. Dreams were adjusted to fit approval. Even failure felt borrowed, measured against expectations that were never his to begin with. One quiet morning, he sat by his window with a cup of coffee, watching the city wake up. There was no urgency in the moment. No pressure to define the future. And for the first time, he asked himself an honest question without judgment. If no one were watching, what kind of life would I build? The answer didn't come all at once. It came in fragments. A desire for calm instead of chaos. Meaning instead of attention. Progress that felt steady instead of rushed. None of it sounded impressive, but all of it felt true. That realization scared him more than comparison ever had. Because choosing his own path meant accepting responsibility for it. There would be no one else to blame. No timeline to hide behind. Just him and his choices. He started making small decisions aligned with that truth. He said no more often. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. He stopped chasing opportunities that drained him just because they looked good on the surface. He began investing time in skills that interested him, even if they didn't promise immediate results. People noticed a change. Some said he seemed calmer. Others said he seemed distant. A few questioned his ambition. Their opinions stirred something inside him, but it didn't control him the way it once did. He understood now that when you stop comparing, you also stop explaining. There were setbacks, moments when old habits returned with force. A sudden achievement from someone he knew would still tighten his chest. A reminder of how far he still had to go would still bring doubt. But instead of spiraling, he sat with those feelings. He let them pass. He learned that confidence wasn't loud. It wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to move forward even when fear whispered comparisons in his ear. One evening, while cleaning out old boxes, he found a notebook from years ago. Inside were dreams he had once written down. Some were unrealistic, some were naive, but all of them were honest. Reading them felt like meeting a younger version of himself who hadn't learned to measure worth yet. He didn't feel regret. He felt compassion. That version of him had done the best he could with what he knew at the time. So had every version since. That night, he understood something deeply. Growth wasn't about becoming better than others. It was about becoming kinder to himself. The park remained a place of grounding. Whenever life felt overwhelming, he returned there, sat on the same bench, and reminded himself that life wasn't late. It was layered. It unfolded in ways that couldn't be rushed or compared. He watched people pass through the park. Children running without concern. Couples walking at different paces, adjusting naturally. Elderly people sitting quietly, no longer proving anything. Each stage carried its own beauty, its own challenges. None of them invalidated the others. That realization settled into him like truth. He stopped asking why things hadn't happened sooner and started asking what they were preparing him for. He stopped wishing for someone else's life and started shaping his own, slowly, intentionally. And somewhere along the way, without a dramatic moment or public celebration, he felt proud of himself. Not because he had arrived, but because he was finally present. As the seasons changed, he noticed how differently time felt now. It no longer chased him. Days passed with purpose instead of pressure. He still had goals, but they no longer screamed at him from the future. They walked beside him, patient and quiet, waiting for him to catch up in his own way. There were moments when the old voice returned, especially during quiet nights or unexpected comparisons that slipped through without warning. A headline about someone's sudden success. A conversation that reminded him of where he wasn't yet. In those moments, doubt knocked softly, hoping to be let back in. Sometimes he opened the door a little. Sometimes he didn't. But even when he did, he no longer let doubt rearrange the furniture of his mind. He had learned that progress wasn't fragile. It didn't disappear just because comparison tried to re-enter. What mattered was how quickly he returned to himself. One afternoon, he received news that once would have shaken him deeply. Someone he knew had achieved something he had dreamed of for years. The familiar tightness appeared, almost instinctively. He felt it fully. Then he took a breath and asked himself what he had practiced asking for months now. What does this awaken in me? The answer surprised him. Not jealousy, not resentment, but clarity. It reminded him of what he wanted to build, not what he wanted to copy. The feeling passed, leaving behind motivation that felt clean, not desperate. That night, he walked through the park again. The trees stood bare, preparing for another cycle of renewal. He sat on the bench and thought about how much of his life he had spent rushing seasons that were meant to be lived slowly. How often he had judged winter for not being spring. He smiled softly at the thought. He realized that the life he once envied didn't belong to him for a reason. It required sacrifices he didn't want to make, responsibilities he wasn't meant to carry, desires that didn't align with his values. And the life he was building, quiet as it seemed, fit him perfectly. Peace didn't arrive all at once. It accumulated, in moments of self-respect, in boundaries honored, in choices made privately, without applause, in mornings where he didn't reach for comparison before reaching for himself. People still asked questions about timelines, about plans, about when things would finally happen for him. He answered calmly now, sometimes honestly, sometimes vaguely. He no longer felt the need to justify a life that felt right. He understood that not everyone would recognize growth that didn't look familiar. And that was okay. One evening, while writing alone, he paused mid-sentence and felt something settle deeply within him. Gratitude. Not the performative kind, but the quiet acknowledgement of how far he had come mentally, emotionally, spiritually. He wasn't who he once was. And he didn't need to be anyone else. He thought back to the version of himself who woke up each day feeling behind before the day had even begun. He wished he could reach back and say what he knew now. That nothing was wrong with him. That life wasn't late. That comparison was never proof of failure, only a distraction from truth. He realized then that his journey wasn't meant to be rushed because it was meant to be understood. The world around him continued at its usual speed. Success stories rose and fell. Trends changed. Expectations shifted. But he stayed anchored, rooted in self-awareness rather than approval. He learned to trust slow progress, to value depth over speed, to measure success by alignment instead of attention. These lessons didn't make him better than anyone else. They made him better to himself. And that changed everything. On a quiet morning much like any other, he woke up and noticed something surprising. The heaviness was gone, not replaced by excitement or certainty, but by steadiness. The kind that doesn't need validation. The kind that knows where it stands without looking around. He smiled, not because life was perfect, but because it was his. He had stopped comparing, and in doing so, he had finally begun living.